We live in an orphan world. Unfortunately, youth are not given the proper amount of time, love, attention, and nurture that every child deserves. This is especially true when it comes to the calling of God on an individual's life. We cannot ignore these prime moments during our youth, but be intentional, as I believe the Lord is, as the Bible reminds us to, not despise small beginnings. These small beginnings happen when we're very, very young. We can all think of these great men and women of God like Billy Graham, Beth Moore, John Wesley, David Young Cho, and others that seem to be born from this rock of greatness and started ministering fresh out of the womb. This is clearly not true, but that is what we think sometimes, as if they just skipped their entire childhood and became mature overnight to go into full-time ministry and never look back or falter ever again. One of the greatest evangelists of all time, Reinhard Bonnke, one of my favorites, recalls his first time being called by the Lord to be a missionary to Africa when he was just a boy of 10 years old. Not long after this conversation, he says, I attended a life-changing Sunday service. On this particular day, a husband and wife missionary had been invited to speak. I do not remember much about them because as they were speaking the Spirit of God, they spoke directly to my heart. It was as if he said very clearly, Reinhard, one day you will preach my gospel in Africa. Until this moment, I had been a boy born in Germany, with very little exposure to the larger world. My mental picture of the continents was not well schooled, but in my heart, it was as if Africa had been suddenly written there. He goes on to say, I often wondered if the country of Africa had been suggested to my mind by those missionaries who spoke that morning. Germany had a historic presence in Africa during the colonial era. I had certainly heard of it, but nothing had been made personal to me concerning the Dark Continent. I had certainly heard of it, but maybe this couple had been working in Africa and had shown me pictures. I frankly do not remember, he says, and little does it matter. What matters is that I heard God speak in my heart so very clearly. Even as a child, Reiner could understand and hear the Lord's voice when he was calling him. What matters most is not how old or mature we are when we hear the Lord, but that we listen and obey when he does. The title of this sermon is When the Lord Calls, Listen Up. So now we'll look at a young boy by the name of Samuel in more detail. Samuel was just a young kid as well when he first heard the Lord's voice. Though simple in its narrative, this story has profound instruction for us today regarding these small beginnings. A simple cursory reading of the text shows that, unfortunately, Samuel does die towards the end of the first book, so we have to conclude that it wasn't written by the prophet himself. Sorry, spoiler alert. Scholars instead like to refer to the author as a Deuteronomist because the history was compiled and informed by the theology of Deuteronomy. Books like Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings form this grand connected narrative of Israel's history that pull a lot from the teachings and theology of Deuteronomy. Scholars date it during sometime after the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC, so sometime between 560 and 539 BC. It's important to remember that during this time, Israel had no single human king at this point. There were a series of judges that loosely led and protected the people. There were some judges that did right in the eyes of the Lord, and there were some that really didn't. This was before King Saul and King David. Samuel was a child that was given by Hannah to be raised up in the temple, to be set apart for the Lord. As we shall see, when we're put in the right place at an early age especially, we're set up for success, just like Samuel. So starting in verse 1, I'll start. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord in the presence of Eli, and the word of the Lord was rare in those days. There was no frequent vision. At that time, Eli, whose eyesight has begun to grow dim, so that he could not see, was lying down in his own place. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called Samuel, and he said, "Here I am." He ran to Eli, and he said, "Here I am, for you've called me." But he said, "I did not call. Lie down again." So he went and lay down, and the Lord called again, "Samuel." "Here I am, for you've called me." But he said, "I did not call, my son. Lie back down again." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and did not know the word of the Lord that had been revealed to him. And the Lord called Samuel again, a third time. And he arose and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you have called me." And Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, "Go, lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant hears.'" So Samuel went and lied down in his place, and the Lord came and stood, calling as in other times, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant hears." Then the Lord said to Samuel, "Behold, I am about to do a thing in Israel at which the 2 ears of everyone who hears it will tingle. On that day I will fulfill against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house from beginning to end. And I declare to him that I am about to punish his house forever. For the iniquity that he knew, because his sons were blaspheming me, he did not restrain them. Therefore I swear to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be atoned for by sacrifice or offering forever." Samuel lay until morning. He opened the doors of the house of the Lord. And Samuel was afraid to tell the vision to Eli. But Eli called Samuel and said, "Samuel, my son." He said, "Here I am." And Eli said, "What is it that he told you? Do not hide it from me. May God do so as to you and more also, if you hide anything from me, all that he told you." So Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him. And he said, "It is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him." And Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground. And all Israel from Dan to Beersheba knew that Samuel was established as a prophet of the Lord. And the Lord appeared again at Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel at Shiloh by the word of the Lord. So Samuel, as you can tell, is quite a unique individual, extraordinarily blessed by the Lord. Someone could just look at his life at this brief passage and conclude that he has got it made. He's perfect. The Lord was with Samuel, and he let none of his words fall to the ground. Although that was the case, having so much favor on Samuel's life, I would like for us to consider 3 different factors that help shape him that we can apply to our own calling as the Lord has in store for us. These factors constitute the basic building blocks that we can follow to grow up into the calling that the Lord has put on our lives. So step number 1, or building block number 1, occurs in the text when the author notes that Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Samuel grew up in the temple, being raised by Eli, the priest of Shiloh, who taught him and mentored him. Most importantly, he was constantly in the presence of the Lord, where the ark of the covenant was. As believers, we must intentionally surround ourselves with others in the right environment with the right people. This is step number 1. When I say right, I do not always mean morally right, because as we know, Eli didn't always do the right things, or else the Lord would not have judged him the way he did. When I mean the right environment, I mean to say that the Lord leads us to find people uniquely connected to our personal calling, to mentor us and teach us. A farmer cannot teach a doctor, but even a basic farmer can teach a boy how to begin to farm and lay the right foundation needed to be an excellent farmer one day. I would like to call this the greenhouse effect. Imagine a seed is the calling of the Lord. This seed needs to be planted in the right soil with the right amount of sunlight and has to be daily watered. The right environment with the right conditions helps the seed naturally grow without too much extraneous effort. In fact, the seed does not have to try because the growth naturally happens in the beginning as a result of the right conditions and the right environment. Remember, beloved, you have to plant yourself alongside people that are doing what the Lord has called you. People who want to invest in you and want to nurture what the Lord has put inside of you. Do not take it lightly. Do not just throw yourself in front of the first or second person that you see doing what you have a passion for, or is even remotely connected to the calling on your life. Ask the Lord. Pray for Him to show you the right person, and He will.